Welcome to GovTalk. I'm Al Tyree. Joining us today is Gino Sexton. Gino is a retired federal employee, member of the Senior Executive Service, also a curriculum director for the Graduate School USA, and over your career, many more accomplishments that we probably can't cover in the time we have here today, Gino, but welcome. I recently read a GAO study that said that somewhere around 1/3 of federal employees are eligible for voluntary retirement. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's kind of interesting because we've long heard about the retirement bubble and that it was going to burst. And for a while, there was data that said that most people stay 3 or 4 years beyond their retirement eligibility, but that has been compressing. And workers are retiring sooner after their eligibility than in the past. And remarkably, there are a few agencies and departments where 40% or more of their workforce would be eligible to retire next year. And that's pretty daunting for those agencies and for their HR programs. I mean, they need to shift gears quickly if they haven't, and get into some robust succession planning, recruitment and retention strategies, and flexibilities as well, and more career development and career progression to keep employees. Because even though there's going to be a large retirement, there are employees still leave before retirement of the millennial generation. So the agencies really need to get prepared for that. And I know they know that, but this is really bigger than the bubble we've been talking about. This potential mini crisis, really.
As I read through this GAO report, I was going through it. I said, "Have I read this before? This sounds so familiar." And I went back and actually found Workforce 2000.
Yes.
In the late '90s, which actually was talking about some of the same challenges that government had.
Yeah.
This impending wave of retirees. So it continues. But what's different now than at that point in time?
I think what's different now, and I remember Workforce 2000, I can go back that far. I think what's different now is that there's a lot of pressure on federal workers in terms of their benefits working for the government. I mean, when I started working for the government, it was a stable, secure retirement with good benefits and so forth.
Sure.
The current administration is taking on a lot of different aspects of that. They're looking into, of course, pay freezes when they can. They're looking into different ways to calculate the annual leave. They're actually looking at different ways to deal with the FERS retirement program. And I think that's can be a little scary for some federal employees. What's going to happen. And so, as I mentioned, people are starting to retire now closer to their retirement eligibility than they used to. They used to work a little longer after eligibility, but no more.
There are implications for an agency and obviously for the individual that's retiring. Talk to us a little bit about maybe what agencies can do to start to prepare for this wave of retirees, if you will.
Well, they've really got to do some serious, as I mentioned before, succession planning, where you really line up who is eligible, what is the probability that they will retire, and then who are the people who can backfill, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 years down the road, and begin to develop them and begin to really help them be prepared to step into those jobs when somebody has retired. So you can't just sort of like lay back and say, when Al retires, we'll just announce a job and see who comes in.
Right.
You need to look around and say, Al, you're eligible to retire next year. What's the probability you're thinking right now? I think I'll retire when I'm eligible. Then we need to look around and say, okay, who are likely successors to Al? And within merit promotion principles, of course, but begin to develop people who can be possible successors, again, within the merit principle.
Mm-hmm. So an organization really has to understand that the implications are far beyond just an individual walking out the door. I mean, there's knowledge management, there's succession planning, and so forth. So.
Oh yeah, and they need to be much more use the flexibilities they have, retention allowances, recruitment bonuses, and so forth, so on. They need to look at our veteran community more. A lot of veterans out there looking for work. Veterans are a fantastic source of because of the public service that they've learned from the military. They need to be more. What I would say, less passive recruitment and be more outreach. And one of the things agencies I think failed to do in my time my 34 years in government, is when they're not recruiting or they're not filling jobs, they shut down their recruitment processes and their recruitment programs. No, you need to have those programs ongoing, even when you're not filling jobs. Those partnerships with colleges and universities, with professional associations and with PR companies, whatever your recruitment mechanism is, it has to always be going, even when you're not filling jobs, so that it can be ready to go when you start filling jobs. You don't have to start up again.
Yeah, interesting thought there. And then perhaps we won't be so reactive when we see these
Absolutely.
awe-inspiring, these numbers,
Yeah.
of these waves of retirees or pending retirees.
Yeah, because if you have the machinery in place and it's still running, then you don't have to, do a startup
Right.
and try and get ahead of the curve. You're already there.
So what about the individual? What can the individual do?
Wow, retirement. It's one of the biggies, right? Marriage, retirement. I remember when I was working, and everybody would say, especially on a bad day, would say, the day I'm eligible to retire, I'm out of here. And then that day gets closer, and that
Right.
day comes, and you're not quite ready. Either you're not quite ready financially, or you're not quite ready psychologically, or both. So I think it helps to know what your options are and what your benefits are going to be, and what your annuity is going to look like. But also it helps to psychologically have an idea. Do I want to work part-time? Do I want to get a hobby? Do I want to do volunteer work? Do I want to do nothing? Do I want to experiment? Because suddenly you wake up that first morning when you retire, and you're like, wow, what do I do? I don't have to get up. I don't have to go anywhere. I can do anything. Mm-hmm. And that can be a double-edged sword. I can do anything. Well, now what does that mean? Right. So you need to prepare psychologically, but also financially. You need to talk to your HR folks or take some classes around what are my options, how does my TSP, what are my TSP options, where does Medicare come into play, where does Social Security come into play, what benefits are there for my spouse. As you know, when you retire, you can set up you take a deduction on your annuity in order for your spouse to have something when you pass away. There are all kinds of things to think about. Right. And it's kind of like you don't want to think about it at the last minute, believe me.
Particularly, when you think about the instructors and just the overall experience, some of what I've heard of graduate school training is that dynamic learning environment. And I know that you're providing information to these retirees, but what about the experience? You've got a number of folks in the room there. Maybe there's a question that you want to ask that you didn't ask, and how much can an individual kind of additionally learn from that?
That's a great question, because what happens sometimes in these classes, everybody does have their individual situation. A lot of times the instructors will do some one-on-one advice, either at the break or lunch, or even stay after class. You just have to ask, and they'll be happy to do that as well.
That's great.
Because it does get, there are some individual questions of people, and the whole class you don't want the whole class to hear it, they don't want to hear it. Mm-hmm. So, our instructors will do that.
We're also providing you with a link to the graduate school site there, so you can visit that for more information as well. Gino, it's always a pleasure having you. We look forward to having you back again. Your wealth of information for us that are just marginally conversant, if that. So we appreciate that. We appreciate you for tuning in to GovTalk. Be well.
Thank you, Al.